What we've found is that even though we have a little bit over 1,700 devices, only about 450 of them are in use concurrently at a peak. And so that's a lot of investment that's not being utilized fully. And so if we can bring that utilization, right size that utilization, I think that would be a major win for campus.
I think the latter, back when the laptop program evolved, and this was, like I said, about 15 years ago, there was a reduced footprint of, on-campus computer labs. We still have a few, very few, but they are kind of more targeted towards the majors or studies, as well as the devices are specialized computers, if you will. So overall, we do not have large lab spaces as many other colleges and universities do. And you're right, that's in part because we give a laptop to each of our students.
We have been actually exploring for a few years prior to all this happening, how we could better virtualize our lab infrastructure. And how we could really move away from the idea of the physical computer lab and maybe not so much the space, but the equipment in it. It just is not a very efficient use of resources. And so, we were a school that supported upwards of 500 or 600 individual desktop computers across the school. And some of those were more specialty labs where we had equipment plugged in, and then we would plan to maintain those. But the majority of our labs were really just kind of general use, generic computer labs. And so, as those would come up for refresh, we would look at options for how we could, maybe remove the computers from those spaces and provide a virtual alternative. And so we were beginning to explore that process. We had retired we'd removed computers from about two of our labs to that point. And I think really what kind of drove us, I think, to look for a solution, a VDI solution also were some of the unique constraints that we had around running GPU-based applications, things like SolidWorks, things like that. And so that's really where we were struggling a little bit to find a good solution for those. And that's kind of where we were beginning to dip our toes in with Oporto, as we were looking to set up a pilot there with Oporto as this all hit.
Where Middlebury is located, it's very cold in the winter, so having to trek across campus even to access a lab is sometimes not pleasant. So being able to provide that kind of flexibility to students was something that we were really interested in doing with remotely accessing via web browser. We have a managed service that we're working with Oporto to set up these machines. So that's something else that was really attractive to us. So there's the flexibility, and then there's also the ease of use and the ease of management for us. We're certainly looking for something that requires fewer physical on-campus resources, whether that's infrastructure that's in a closet somewhere that's serving clients, or actual physical computers. We've all walked into a lab and seen students having had pushed back computers and have their laptops up in front of it. So we want to get the most out of the resources that we have, and part of that is not providing resources.
Primary drivers of considering cloud is that it would provide a lot of great factors, such as disaster recovery, agility, all those common words that we hear. And it would help our teams be ready for any future types of shifts. So, of course, now in hindsight, it's great that we started our cloud journey. I would say we started it years ago when we started adopting SaaS and IaaS and all those other options of putting parts of your infrastructure or parts of your tools in the cloud. When COVID-19 finally came, and we were wondering, what would we do if we had to work remotely? What if people couldn't come onto the campus to do their work? Well, not a problem, because at least a couple of years ago when we started really strategizing this, these were parts of our discussions: business continuity, agility, flexibility, quick moving of things. And so, and now we're starting to explore, of course, whether or not it will maybe eventually save us money. So many other factors too, including moving away from capital expenditures, moving to operational, and of course that helps us more flatten out our predicted expenses over time. That helps with financial planning as well. Now, a little bit very quickly about our Fresno State students and the demographics of our students. We have roughly somewhere around 25,000 students, and many of them receive Pell Grants, which basically indicates that they are coming from lower socioeconomic status families and backgrounds. So they already struggle with having perhaps a high-tech computer or even a computer at all. They may struggle having the right internet access or sometimes no internet at all. So many of our students, and we've heard personal stories, they would literally need to come to the library to use the computer to do their schoolwork. And that there was one letter we received from I think a younger student, someone in her first or second year, who basically seemed very emotional in writing the letter, stating that she was very appreciative that she was able to come to campus every day after work, after classes, after work, and do her coursework until the library closed at midnight. Stories like these that motivate us and help us to do our work and help us to connect to the mission.
A good story about our journey to Oporto. We had a student that was working on their dissertation over the course of this summer, and they needed access to some specialized software that's only available in one lab on campus. But with the COVID lab and building restrictions, the entire lab was shut. The student couldn't access it at all. And so even though we had just signed the Oporto contract, in about 48 hours, we were able to get that student access to the software that they needed, and they were able to complete their dissertation. So from that moment, I knew we were going to have a pretty good experience with this environment. And we've gotten a couple of departments really excited about it, particularly our mathematical sciences department. They have a mixed lab where some students are bringing their own device, and some students are using devices provided by UNC. And so the environment, of course, doesn't match up between the two. And so being able to use Oporto to deliver the same experience across those devices, whether they're UNC's or students' personal device, really has excited them. As COVID arrived in spring, a lot of software vendors were pretty flexible, and they allowed a lot of our students to have extended trial licenses of software so they could install campus software onto their local devices. We knew that grace was going to expire as we got closer to fall. And so we started looking around and thinking about what we could do. And that's how we were able to start getting the funding for Oporto. I think pretty early on, we could see that we weren't all going to be on campus in a regular way for fall. And so we talked to our administration, we talked to others in IT, we talked to some of the campus faculty, and that's how we landed on Oporto as our platform for fall.
I think although the COVID provides this as a trigger point, but I think this is transformation that will exist, and this is here to stay. And I think this just kind of opens the minds of our faculties, staff, and students to kind of explore beyond our old strategy that was providing a physical laptop. So, and I'm really, as I look at Oporto and some of the things it does, where it provides the flexibility for the students to use their devices or different forms of devices to connect to the virtual desktop. And that's, I think, a great sell. Even for faculty, what we are trying to do is make them understand some of the insights they can get from some of the reporting and some of the information they can see on which students are using software for how long, and that can be a great measure for student success, because that can give insights to the faculty members on what elements the students might be struggling on, engagement issues that they need to figure things out in their physical or virtual classrooms.
When this hit, actually, we were, well, as I said, we were just starting up our pilot, and so we had a couple of things going for us. I think that helped us as we went in. We had done a lot of the legwork in terms of integrating with our single sign-on, our shibboleth provider, and our what we call Woostle key or single sign-on with you all. In addition, we had, kind of established a lot of the VPN connections and things that were necessary to get back to, say, licensing servers and things like that. And so we were well down that path when this happened. And the beauty of it was we were able to scale. And I think what's really kind of interesting about it for us is we were just exploring it kind of as a school, right? We were engaging in a pilot, but when this hit, a number of my counterparts across the university, from our School of Arts and Sciences to the Brown School, Social Work and Public Health at Washington University, all of a sudden needed a remote solution. And we were able to take kind of what we had put in place and some of the framework and groundwork that we'd done and quickly scale that up to meet the demands of really the rest of the university. And so that was really great to see, and it speaks to the benefits of a cloud partner and a cloud provider to be able to scale to meet those needs in a quick way.
We sent out a survey to faculty requesting, asking what they would need software-wise. We kind of then got the responses, made sure that we could meet those needs, and we went through the faculty and allowed them, we wrote the documentation, the information, and then we allowed faculty to introduce the tool to students in their courses. So it was a very targeted approach. It was really difficult to try to anticipate the amount of use we were going to get. And I think especially, you look at concurrent usage, but then you also realize that all of your students are spread out around the world across time zones, and most of the classes were asynchronous, or at least most of the lab work was asynchronous. So it's really challenging to know what the number of concurrent students you're gonna have is. We asked them what they need, like what was an absolute requirement to be able to teach remotely. And then we went through the list of applications that they requested and started, seeing what we could put into a Porto and then communicating with them that way. A lot of students have never used a virtual machine, but don't really have a good idea of, what to expect. They're used to just launching an application on their own computer or walking into a computer lab and launching an application. But, I think at first there's some concern about, things being choppy or being some latency that are possibly related to their home network. But really, if you realize the power of not having to install these things on your own computer, and you can just run them through the web browser and do what you need to do and save your data to OneDrive or Google Drive and be on your way. I mean, there's a lot of value in that.
Flexibility is the key. Having a solution, a virtual desktop solution like Porto, opens more doors and provides more flexibility to the technology teams, to the facilities teams, to kind of repurpose some of these lab spaces to create more collaboration spaces. There is a value in how the students might be congregating in the lab spaces today. But again, the way lab spaces have been configured, it's a decades-old design. The furniture or the rooms are not designed for active learning or participative learning. And so, we are near downtown Boston. Space is of premium. And so what I feel is, if you can figure out a way to repurpose some of these lab spaces by introducing a virtual desktop, you can actually create more collaboration spaces for active learning.
Really, I think it was that the leadership here at the university understood that technology was going to be a key part of not only, I think, of the immediate transition in the spring, but also making what is now fall successful. You know, there wasn't exactly a line item there for this, but you know, we did. The senior leadership understood the value of this and understood that this is an area where we could invest. And so, you know, we were able to come up with funding for this. Really, in the spring, that was really at a school level, but you know, then we took a step back over the course of the summer and realized that this was a solution that really was going to help us going forward, maybe a larger scale, but beyond. And so really looked to, you know, kind of formalize that at more of a university level, and got an agreement in place over the course of the summer for that. Computer labs will always have a place, you know, in the university. I think, you know, you look at, you know, an example of that is our electrical and systems engineering group, right? They have oscilloscopes that plug into, you know, into desktops, and they need that equipment and computers to make that work. Those are always going to be there. But, you know, I think that as we look forward, especially now that students really are finding that they're able to do a lot of what they want to do from their laptop, if they can have access to the right software in the right way. You know, do we need to continue to invest in those hundreds of desktops that we deploy out into our environment, or can we can we look to, you know, reallocate those resources elsewhere to making a better maybe collaboration experience for students, or something along those lines, and really leverage the cloud to help deliver some of those more complex applications, such as SolidWorks or something that we might not be able to do otherwise.
I would consider computer labs and virtualized computer labs as part of a journey of what higher ed is embarking on, which, if you put it all under the umbrella of what we'll call digital transformation, innovation through technology, but there are different components and there are different levels of transformation. One is just digitizing, which means taking paper and converting it into perhaps just a PDF. That can bring some efficiencies. The next level could be what some are calling digitalization. And that would be taking workflows and things that we would have done with paper or walking around or in a physical setting, and making that available fully digital. So it takes the digital paper version and takes it to the next level. And then what we'll truly call digital transformation is that now you can reimagine, through digitizing and digitalization, you can reimagine how work can be done, because now you have new enabling factors through the really empowered use through technology. We've also been imagining physical computer lab space perhaps back into classrooms. And there are other, of course, benefits of having a tool like a Porto, which is that we can have computer labs anywhere, including outdoors. We can just have people go to any room even and start doing testing. And I know Porto and other vendors are starting to add specific features that might benefit, such as the classroom view feature, which we're very interested in. And there are other great aspects that basically help us reimagine how a computer lab can benefit students beyond just being a terminal to use software.
We did a survey at the end of the spring semester with our students and asked for how many of them at Porto met the needs for remote learning. And I think 90% said it met their needs. And then I think it was 85 to 90% also said that they would like for a Porto to continue to be available. So that's a really high percentage of students saying that this was valuable and they would like to continue to be able to use it even when they're back on campus.
What I would share with other admins, I guess they're looking at a Porto, is the more data you have, the more knowledge you have about how software is being used in your environment, the easier it's going to be to use a Porto and right size your environment. If you have information on utilization of software or computing devices, that's going to help greatly. Just the more information that you have, the better off you're going to be.
There's a little bit of luck involved, but I think it also spoke to, at least from my perspective, my team was pushing on this for a few years before all this happened, knowing that we needed to have a VDI solution in place, even when there wasn't necessarily quite as clear a use case as we as we needed. But I think, it speaks to, having a team that goes out and thinks about this stuff and pushes things forward is really a valuable thing to have, because they were the one, the folks on my team were the ones who were pushing and, went out and even found, a Porto as a solution and said that we should be piloting this. So, having those people who do that has really proved, at least for me, valuable in making us successful throughout the spring and beyond.
Don't think of this as just an infrastructure project that you do it behind the scenes. I say plan ahead, start the discussion with faculty, with students as early as you can. Start small. Pilot with one faculty. Start piloting with a few faculty across each discipline, and from there increase the awareness.
So I would first say that there are many different options to consider. There's, of course, hosting on premise, the infrastructure needed, the common vendors that we've heard through Citrix and Amazon and VMware and others all have on-prem solutions where you can add hardware to run your own virtual computer labs. There's also looking at turning a physical space with physical computers and running some kind of software on top of that to help direct traffic and load balance and then basically point people to physical computers, thus essentially making a private cloud of sorts of computer labs available through the cloud still. And then there's the fully cloud-based versions where Amazon, VMware, Porto, and many others also have offerings of either desktop experiences or application streaming. All of those approaches come with their own constraints, their own complexities, and costs of various sorts. If you do on-prem, then you've got to make sure you have the skill sets. You have to pay for certain other things. You need to make sure your network is running really well. And with the cloud, there are also great options, but then you have to have different skill sets. The costing structures are different, and the licensing can get complex, and securing those fully cloud-based types of computer labs are also very complex. So lesson learned would be, first, don't assume that any solution will be just snap your finger and quickly get done, and they all will take time. And so it would really encourage people to chat with peers who've done all those different approaches to learn why they may have chosen a certain one. And I would say a lot of times the final decisions really depend on the skill sets of the people, budgets, of course, but also it could be institutional culture. I would not say that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for any institution, and so many of those factors will always apply. Have a chat with at least a couple of peers to learn why they've made their decisions, and let's say they are choosing to go with a Porto, for example, or any cloud-based, what then are the complexities of that type of solution? And so for us, it was really locking down the security, having the right VPN tunnels in place and firewall rules, and getting the licensing servers connected was complex. And then one other big one is maybe try not to throw in the kitchen sink on the first attempt, which we did try to do, to try to throw in all the software that every student needed. And that caused some longer implementation time for us.
A few things I'd like to add along that line is some of the things we considered was total cost. Considering, all the costs involved in implementing a service such as a Porto or any service that involves application streaming. So we looked at those factors and then also compared them to the total cost of physical labs as well as other services that are similar. Another factor that we considered were just resources that we have on campus. What's our staffing? Do we have enough staff to make this type of service sustainable, depending on which resource we go with, whether it's on-premise or whether it's with the cloud or whether it's like a cloud service like a Porto. The resources were important because once you do implement a service like this, it needs to be supported. If you have thousands of users, tens of thousands of users, people are going to be calling, they're going to have questions. So do you have the staff, do you have the resources to accommodate this type of service? And then the third part that I like to include is the timeline. So when do you need the service by? Is it an emergency, or do you have time to consider and make a more thoughtful decision? Those factors are something that you want to think about as well. If it's something that you need in a week, consider that. If you have several months or maybe half a year, then that will play as a major component in your decision process. So 3 things just to summarize: total cost, the resources that you have currently, and the timeline that you're looking for.